Hello everyone, welcome to my 9th episode of G.GOES Live. It's Wednesday again and I have been waiting for this for a week. I miss you guys. Tonight, as you can see, I am solo and this session will be a question and answer session that I dedicate every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks for you to ask anything you want about music production, DJing, music business, nightlife, synthesis, equipment, technology, anything that is related to the topics that I talk about. So let's start first of all with the first question that I got from Firas. He said, if all my channels have headroom, why is the master channel distorted? Well, that's an excellent question, by the way. Firas, I think you're asking about the peak meter of the channel. I think you're asking about the yellow or red light on your master channel or on individual channels. So again, the question is, if all my channels have headroom, why is my master channel distorted with a red light or with a yellow light or whatever? That's actually an excellent question. I'm happy that Firas asked it. It's something that I always talk about at the school as well. First of all, let me tell you something about headroom and about, because you mentioned headroom, and about master channel and distortion. First of all, when you start working on multi-channels, let's say you started a project and you want to start layering elements, like you start with a kick maybe, or you start adding some snares, some drums, some elements, and then you reach a point where you start adding more major elements like bass lines and melodies, chords, etc. So when you look at each channel individually, you might be at the green zone, which is the no distortion zone. And of course, when you are in the green zone, you will find on the peak meter in Ableton, for example, on the peak rounded box, which measures the headroom or which measures the peak level of your channel, you will find a negative value if you're in a green zone. For example, your drums or your kick is at minus, let's say, 5 dB. What does this mean? It means if your kick is at minus 5 dB, let's say, or minus 12 or whatever, that number represents the headroom. So what is headroom? Headroom is the amount or the space that it is left for you to increase the volume before you reach something called 0 dB FS. Okay, when you start talking about dB, you always have to mention which domain you're measuring this volume at. For example, if you say 0 dB SPL, which is the sound pressure level, here you're talking about the decibel volume inside the acoustic domain. So for example, if you have a sound at 0 dB SPL, it means it's a vacuum, it's no sound, it's just complete silence, okay? In the digital domain in Ableton, for example, we measure something with dB on the channel by dBFS. So what does it stand for? It's the full scale, all right? So what is a full scale? A 0 dBFS is the last point you can reach before distortion, before Ableton starts to trim your wave signal and give you a distorted signal, all right? So if you reach -1, let's say, and you want to keep increasing the volume, you will notice at one point that your channel starts to give you this red light or yellow light or whatever. It means your channel is distorted. You no longer have a complete wave form, all right? So after that, you start also to have many elements combined together, which your master channel will start calculating. So if you have negative values on all your channels, you are in the green zone everywhere, it doesn't mean your master channel is in the green zone too. And that's the case Firas asked. He's saying, if all my channels have headroom, why is the master channel distorted? That's an excellent question. So again, if all your elements have headroom, negative value, no red light, no yellow light, no nothing, again, it doesn't mean that your master channel has the same headroom. Why? First of all, when you work with samples, or we work with different elements coming from different frequency ranges. Like for example, you have a kick and a bass line. All right, the kick and the bass line, they come mainly from the low frequency range. If at one point your kick and the bass line are both overlapped, they are playing at the same time, for example, if your kick alone is at minus, let's say 12, and your bass line is at minus, let's say 15, your master channel might be at 0 or might peak. You got the point. Let's say you have 8 channels. You have a kick and a snare and hi-hats, and you have bass line, vocal, and chords, piano chords. When you have all the channels with enough headroom, it doesn't mean your master channel is also with enough headroom, because you have to consider that all the channels are linked to your master channel. So they will sum up in frequencies, and they will go to your master channel, and there is also a peak meter, the rounded box. So you have to make sure that when you play the sounds as they are, without filtering or cutting those unwanted clashing frequencies from sounds that, for example, have a sweet spot on 5K, and you get a spectrum analyzer, you find a lot of frequencies on maybe 50 and 100 and 200 hertz. So you have to cut those frequencies, because even if you do not hear them, it doesn't mean that they are not doing any harm in your project. That's where the harm is. That's where your master channel can distort. So if you reach a point where you have a proper mix down, and part of the mix down is actually cutting out those unwanted frequencies, you will leave each sound in its place. What does this mean? What is this place we're talking about? We have 3 dimensions in the mix. That's why it's called a sonic dimension. You have 3D mix. You have the volume, which is the front and the back. You have the panning, which is the left and the right. And you have the up and down, which is the frequency. That's the most important aspect of mixing. If you do not have a place for each sound in your mix, then all your sounds will overlap. And this is where the frequency clash will happen. So it doesn't mean if you have all your channels with green light, no peak, no distortion, it doesn't mean that your master channel is not distorted. You must have at least 3 decibels left for you at the master channel, so that the mixing or mastering engineer can do his final job. Never ever play with the master channel with the volume of the master channel. Never. Some people, they have distortion, for example, 4 dB above the full scale, above 0 dB. They have plus 4 dB on the master, and that's where the yellow or green light is. And what they do, simply, they just lower the volume of the master channel by 4 dB, and they are in the green zone again. That's not a solution at all. It's like you are hiding from a problem by implementing another problem. Never touch your master channel. Your master channel must be at 0 dB with the channel volume, which is the squared box in Ableton, but your rounded box on the master channel must have at least 3 decibels. Preferably 6 decibels. You should have -6 in the rounded box master channel, while you have 0 dB in the squared box. Never touch the master channel. So what to do? How to mix? That's a completely different subject. It's a huge subject that I teach as well at Per-vurt. And if you're interested, of course, you can come and learn. And I also talked so much about this topic in my previous G.GOES live. For example, one of my advices or one of my guidelines, you must work on every single sound that you're using. For example, if you have a kick and on top of the kick you have a snare, make sure you solo the snare, you get deeper into the snare, you find if you have unwanted frequencies that are vibrating on the low end, those frequencies you might not hear. That's why you need to have a spectrum analyzer, and you need to cut those frequencies out. You will never change the sound of the snare. You are hearing the snare exactly as it was, but you killed or you filtered unwanted frequencies that will give more headroom to your mix. So if you deal with every single sound of your project, you will end up having more and more headroom. What is headroom? Headroom is, as I said, is the space left for you before you distort. Headroom is always in negative values. For example, you must have a headroom on the master channel, maybe 6 decibels, so that's -6 on the rounded box. All right, that's one advice. You need to get into every single sound, check where the sweet spot of the sound is, where is the body of the sound, and if you have unwanted frequencies from either the low or the mid or the high, cut them out. Of course, cutting them out requires a lot of knowledge and you need to be very precise, and it depends on which device you're using. If you're using an EQ3, for example, you might not be able to cut those resonant areas in the kick or in the bass or whatever. You need to get an EQ8 or an EQ whatever, 12 or 16 or even 30. Some plugins, they have 32 bands. All right, that's how you can be very specific in filtering out frequencies that you do not need. That those frequencies, if you do not hear them, it doesn't mean that they do not harm your project. And those frequencies, when you eliminate them, you will leave more space in your project, and each sound will be taking its own place in your sonic dimension. All right. Another guideline, for example, you can do something called sidechain compression, which is related to volume mainly. We're not talking about multi-band compression with sidechain option. We're talking about sidechain compression. What is sidechain compression? A compressor is a device that is compressing the volume down. So that's killing something called dynamic range. Dynamic range is difference between the lowest volume and the highest peaks. Okay, that's called a dynamic range. When you do a compression, when you use a compressor, you are actually taming, or you're actually compressing the volume down of certain peaks. All right, so if you have a kick and a bass line, it's very important, of course, after you have dealt with those resonant areas in the bass alone and in the kick alone, after you filtered all those unwanted frequencies and you dealt properly with each sound by itself, you should do something, for example, called sidechain compression, which is taking the bass behind the kick when the kick comes in. By the way, sidechain compression is not always taking an input from your kick drum. It's not always the kick drum that needs to be in the front always and everything behind it. You might be doing, for example, sidechain compression for a vocal and a snare. Like say when the snare comes in or when the vocal comes in, you need the snare to be tamed a little bit. You need the snare to be compressed in volume a little bit so that it doesn't clash with your vocal. That's called sidechain compression. So one element will get inside your compressor and it will act as an input compressor. All right, so this sample, whatever it is, could be a kick, could be a bass, could be vocal. Whenever this is there, you are going to be compressing anything else that is behind it. All right, so that's very, very important. If you don't do sidechain compression, you will have kick and drums, for example, with all its elements and the bass line overlapping. And you do not need this on your mix, all right? So if you actually do the sidechain compression, you will be able to hear properly. If that's one, you are having more headroom. That's two, and you are having a proper mix down. That's another guideline. Of course, you have many aspects of mixing, which we will talk about maybe in future sessions. But those two are the main ones that came to mind right now. So the next question is from Nicholas Demirjian. How do I know if the quality of an MP3 or an AAC or FLAC is good? All right, that's a long subject, by the way. So you're talking about MP3 or AAC, all right, or FLAC. Those are the three keywords you mentioned, Nicholas. First of all, let me tell you about the audio formats nowadays. You have something called a compressed format or lossless, and you have a format which is sorry, the compressed is lossy. I'm sorry, and the other one, which is the lossless, which is the uncompressed format. Okay, for the CD quality, of course, you are dealing with a with a quality that is not compressed, which is maybe FLAC or WAVE or AIFF. Those formats are exactly the original. Or those are original. Sorry, my diction got mixed up now. So If you are dealing with an MP3 file, the highest compression rate, which is 320 kbps, which is kilobits per second, is very close to wave, but you are actually removing or deleting a lot of data from this file. So if you have a file, let's say a wave file or a FLAC file or an AIFF file, which is around maybe, let's say 70 megabyte if it's a long track, of course, that file is an uncompressed file, lossless. It doesn't lose any quality. That's how original it is. So if you want to make it, you want to share it online, for example, you don't want to upload and download a lot of data, you compress this file and you transform it from an uncompressed file to a compressed file. So we're talking from, for example, WAV to MP3. And by doing that, you're actually deleting data from the file. So what do you compress? What is compression? Compression is when you actually move from a file that has a size of, let's say, 70 megabytes to a file that is only 17 or 15 megabytes. So how does this happen? How did this file become that from 70 to 17? So you lost a lot of data, right? But the good thing is that when you compress to MP3, the 320 rate is very close to wave. So that's the most clear signal you can ever have with compression. Okay? So for example, if you're a DJ and you want to play in a club or maybe in a venue or whatever, you can actually play 320 kbps MP3 file. But of course, it's always better to play wave or uncompressed file. Now, the question that Nicholas is asking is, how do I know if the quality of an MP3, maybe this MP3 file is already a 320K and it sounds like shit. I got your point. I know what you want. Or an AAC, by the way, AAC, it stands for Advanced Audio Codec, okay? It's the same as MP3, by the way, the AAC, but it's a bit more efficient, I guess. Or he's asking about FLAC, which is the Free Lossless Audio Codec. That's the abbreviation of it. So he's asking, how can I know if it's good? Now, let me tell you something. Don't be fooled by those websites where you can find a lot of MP3 files like 320 or 256 or whatever. Don't be fooled by the quality of the music. Why? Because you can actually see a file on this website. That's the illegal sharing, and you can download this file having in mind that this file will sound great, and it sounds like shit. So how do you know? How do you know about these things? First of all, you must not download music illegally. That's one. Two, 1 second, you guys. Two, if you buy music from iTunes or from Beatport, you will get the highest quality with, you can buy WAV or AIFF or MP3 320 kbps. Now let me tell you something. If you go on any of those websites, the pirate websites, and you find a file which is a 320 kbps, you are so happy and you made a great good job by stealing this track from the website. Congratulations. And now you download the track and it doesn't sound good. So you would say, 320, man, why isn't it that good? Look, the software that you use to compress and to do this kind of you translate a wave to an MP3, or it's just a converter. You have a lot of softwares you can use to convert from wave to MP3, and even when you do the MP3 conversion, you can choose which layer of compression you choose. You want to compress at 320K or at 256 or 128, 192, etc. So let me tell you what happens. Let's say I am someone who is producing a track. I have it in a wave format. I compressed it to 320 kbps. Till now, I have a great quality sounding track. Okay? Now, of course, you won't hear any difference between MP3 and wave if you're hearing this track on your earphone or headphones or speakers in nightclubs or stuff. But you might hear a bit of difference if you're hearing MP3 and wave in a huge concert, in a huge venue with live PA system, etc. So MP3 320 is already good. So let me tell you what happens. I converted my WAV file to 320 and I sent it online to someone. This someone wanted to send it to someone else. So he goes, he's very smart, this guy, by the way, and he uses a converter to push it down from 320 kbps to, let's say, 128 kbps. So when you're compressing the file, you're losing a lot of data. You're losing a lot of details in the song. It's like pixels and stuff like that. So this very smart guy, he has a tool, a converter, a free software maybe. He converted this file from 320 to 128 and he sent it to someone else. Now this someone else who is smarter also than this guy, what he does, he uses a software to convert the 128 MP3 back to 320 kbps. So look what happens here. The software can do this conversion. So you will have a file, a 320 file again. The size of this file will be big again. And if you look at it, you might think that you got the quality back again to the 320. Never. When you compress a file, you are losing quality from the file, okay? But when you try to convert it back to a higher bitrate, you're getting a bigger file, right? The software can also add in the tag of the MP3 file that now this is a 320 kbps. Fine. Listen to it, it will sound like shit. Okay, so back to Nicholas. If you are downloading music illegally, don't be fooled by the 320 tag next to each track. So let's move to another question. This is the third question now. How to get hold of acapellas if I were to remix a track? Do I always have to go through the label or producer? Thanks, Mo, and see you soon. Nadim Tabish. Nadim Tabish just joined now. Look, you're very lucky, man. So let me tell you one thing about remixing, and this is something that I'm always annoyed by it. Some people come to me and they say, listen to my remix of David Guetta, or listen to my remix of Sasha or G.GOES. And this guy has never released anything on Beatport before. He doesn't know what a label is anyway. Look, if you take an MP3 file from the internet with a vocal, let's say, and you try to just make some changes in it, like you add some drums to it, you remove some frequencies from it, and you add, let's say, another bass line, etc. That's not called remixing, okay? The word remix is when the label contacts you and asks you to do a remix. How? By giving you the layers of the track. That's called an official remix. If you are someone who likes to play with softwares and to cut through tracks and just do some edits, now that's not called a remix, it's called an edit or mashup or bootleg or unofficial remix. So don't call yourself a remixer if you were never approached by the label. The label owns the copyright of all the layers of the track. They give you a remix pack, we call it a remix pack, and they ask you to remix the track. And you are free to choose any of the layers and do your own remix for it. So, how to get hold of an acapella? Some people, they share acapellas online. So, how did they get the acapella? You have a lot of websites, they do remix competitions, okay? And they post all the remix packs of the tracks they want other people to remix. And this, usually those sites are open to anyone to join, and you can download the remix pack, you can get acapellas. That's one. Two, some acapellas are stolen from studios. I will tell you how. And they are shared online, okay? And if you are lucky, you can get or find the perfect sounding acapella, that just alone, without any music on top of it, etc. Three, you can actually take an acapella out of a track by inverting the instrumental with the original. That sounds maybe alien to you now, but I'll tell you a small like tip. If you have the instrumental version or the original version which has the vocal in it, like let's say you have a track with vocal, if you can get the instrumental version of the track, which is the same track, same structure, same everything, but with no vocal, you can have those tracks on top of each other and invert one of them. When you invert one of the tracks, what actually happens is that you're canceling all the common elements between the original and the instrumental. Everything that is common is cancelled. So what is left? The thing that is not common, the pure a cappella. You get the a cappella out of a track. And most of the a cappellas are shared online or between brackets stolen in this way, and that's a smart move. I don't call it stealing. And you can take this a cappella and do your own mashups, not remix. Okay, you do your own mashups for DJ use, or you cannot sell it, you cannot sign it, because you do not own the copyright or do not have the permission to use this a cappella and do your own mashup or your own edit. You can share it online. No one can. They will thank you for that if you share it online and make more people listen to it. So the invert thing, I know you're interested to know more about it. You can ask me about it later on, or I can maybe talk about it later on, but the concept is very easy. Any waveform has two sides. It has the compression phase, which is the positive pressure phase, which is a cycle like this, and then there is this line, okay, and then you go below the line, which is the negative phase. That's a sine wave, for example. Anything that I say or talk, any music has a compression phase and then a rarefaction phase. Okay, I talked about this a lot in, I think, G.GOES Live 003. That's called physics of sound. And when you have exactly the same wave, if you put two of them on top of each other, you play them together, you will find that there is something called constructive interference. They will boost, okay, in volume, because you're playing two audio sources. Those are the same audio sources, and then you will find that your master channel is peaking. Okay, now when you invert one of them, what does invert mean? You let the positive side, the compression, becomes a rarefaction, and since they are opposite of each other, they must be exactly on the same grid. They must be exactly the same quality, the same sound for volume, exactly the same position. They should not, there must not be any single difference between both of them. They should play together at the same time. When you invert one of those copies, what you're actually doing, you're having the same compression of one track meet with the rarefaction of the other track. So that's when they cancel each other. Okay, when they cancel each other, the only thing that is remaining is the sound that is not common, which is in this case an a cappella. Okay, by the way, some people, they do this technique to take a tom maybe, or a kick, or a snare. They just take a piece of drums from anywhere in the track, they copy paste it. Okay, they take another piece of drum that has a certain sound that they want to take with all the other sounds that are common, and they just invert. They take out the sounds that are not common. And this is sometimes I do it because sometimes I need to take out something and I cannot have access because it's mixed with other elements, so I do this technique. Okay, I hope I answered you, Nadim. You had another question. Do I always have to go through the label or producer? Not you, Nadim. It's not you who contacts the label. Usually the remixer is approached by the label. Okay, so you don't go knock door, please, I want to remix this track. It doesn't happen like this. What happens usually when, for example, me as a label owner, I have a track, an EP, an original, and I want to get remixers. So I contact my other artists on the roster and I ask them to do a remix. This is Marcelo Vasami with us. He remixed many tracks on Per-vurt as well, and those remixes were charted, played, supported by the biggest DJs in the world like Cataneo and Nick Warren, and also they got into the top 100, etc., etc., etc. And now we're best friends. He came to my studio more than 5 times, I think, or 4 times. Peace, Vasamito. Okay, so let's jump to another question. If a producer pans some elements to the left or right, will the signal be stereo or will it stay as a mono signal? Harry Taslakian. That's actually a very important question as well, Harry. Thank you for asking it. So Harry is asking, if he pans an element to the left or to the right, will the signal be stereo or will it stay as a mono signal? I think the question could have been asked in a different way, but let me explain something about signals. When we say a signal, a mono signal, let's say I'm talking to you now, okay? I have only one mouth, fortunately. So if I'm talking to you, I have one mouth, my signal, what I'm saying is mono, of course, because that's one audio source. That's one oscillator, if you want to call it. So if you are going to record your vocal, for example, let's say I want to record my vocal to a computer, this vocal of mine through the condenser microphone, for example, goes to your Ableton or any DAW as a mono signal. So Ableton is receiving now. You must differentiate. There is a signal coming to the software and the signal coming out of the software. That's the input and the output. When you get inside the software, your signal is mono. So you only see one signal, which is the compression phase and the rarefaction phase, okay? This signal has a straight line in between, which is the 0 dB SPL. That's where the sound is null. It's no sound. That's the 0 dB, no sound at all. And you have the compression phase above it and the rarefaction phase above it, but you only see that. You see nothing else. You don't see two copies of this. Now, if you go to Ableton, let's say, if you're in Ableton and you are producing something, you get a loop from your library, and this loop is in stereo mode. You put it in your channel and you can actually see in the clip window, you can see two signals. You see the left signal and the right signal, and also it's like a copy of this signal. But if you zoom in, if the signal is stereo, you might see differences between the visual representations of the left and of the right. For example, you have, let's give an example. I have, for example, a clip that has two sounds, a male and a female. The male is on the left and the female is on the right completely. That's in one clip. This signal is stereo because you have two channels, one called right and left and one called right, okay? Now, when you are playing this clip in Ableton, Ableton is always, note this is very important, Ableton is always projecting the sound as an output in stereo. So you have left and right. Even if you are listening to a mono input, my vocal recorded in mono, one channel only, no left, no right, Ableton will let you hear it in stereo. How? It will just copy this signal, it will give it to the left, and it will give exactly the same vocal to the right. So the two speakers are giving you my vocal that was recorded in mono, but you are receiving now my vocal in stereo because you have two ears, okay? So back to this clip with the male and female. If I have a male saying hello and a female saying shut up, because that's how female act these days, okay? The male is on the left, the female is on the right. That is a stereo signal. Now, if you pan this to the left, what is panning, by the way, for people who don't know? Panning is panorama. You just have a knob to take the sound from the center. In the case of a stereo signal, if you have it in the center, it means you are listening exactly to what's on the left and what's on the right, exactly as they were produced. If you pan to the left, you're taking the sound only to the left speaker. And if you're panning to the right, you're taking the sound only to the right speaker. But what sound? That's the question. Which phase, which channel? If I'm panning to the left, am I taking the female vocal also to the left? That's what you should really differentiate. So let me go back a little bit and explain something very important about signal. If the male is on the left and the female is on the right, and I have my knob, my panner set on center. So you as a listener, you are going to hear exactly what's happening. One cable is going out of your sound card, which is in mono, by the way, because it has only one channel, which is called the left channel, linked to left speaker. That's why you hear the male only on the left. And you have another cable coming out of your sound card, which is called right, which is linked to the right speaker, and the female is going out of right speaker, the female's voice. And the panner is in the center, okay? Now, when you pan to completely, we call this hard pan. When you go with the panner to the left side completely, which is 50 left, 50L. And by the way, let me tell you something back to mixing. If you do hard pan, you're actually adding 3 dB on the channel. Make sure when you do panning, you decrease the volume a little bit, okay? And let me tell you one more thing. I don't want to forget everything because so much to talk about panning, that actually in Ableton, that's not panning. When you pan on an analog mixer. In Ableton, it's not panning. I don't know if you can see this. That's an analog mix. Ah, you cannot see it. Okay. By the way, I'm shooting with a GoPro, so you can see it later on. Those panners on the channel, each source is 2 channels, left and right. So on the left you have a knob, and on the right you have a knob. That's a real panner. So in Ableton, you don't actually have. You don't pan, you do balance. You balance the sound to the left or to the right. So let me go back. If you do the hard panning on the left, you are not going to listen to anything from this female vocalist. Only the male. But what happens to the right side? Ableton is not projecting anything to the right. So it's like you turned off the speaker on the right side. If you do hard panning of the master channel to the left, you are not hearing anything on the right. That's if of course we only have this channel we're talking about, this clip with the male and the female. And of course, if you do the panning to the right side, you don't hear the male anymore. Now, what happens if you are listening to this track in a big festival where the sound system is in mono? That's the big question. Let's say the intention of this producer, of me, for example, and I did it once for testing, by the way, is to, in the break of the track, for example, a male talks from the left, and people suddenly will look at the left. It's like you're in the cinema. At some point, it's like an illusion. You think that there is really someone on the left, and then suddenly the male talks from the right, and people can move to the right, because this is how the system, the sound system is set in this club, for example. It's set in stereo mode, left alone and right alone. But if you take this track to a big venue, a big festival, and the sound system is set in mono, you will not hear this effect that you wanted. Because what happens in mono, both channels, left and right, will be combined together. Okay, so you won't have any left and right independently. Both left and right will be merged together, and this signal will become mono, and it will be distributed on all the speakers equally the same way. So this producer, me, for example, if I have an intention that in this huge Tomorrowland festival, for example, people will all turn to the left, I will be dreaming, because there are no speakers on the left, there are no speakers on the right. It's only speakers from the main stage, and that's a system in mono. And by the way, big venues, they don't do systems in stereo, because if people in the front row, they won't be exactly where on the axis, they won't hear properly, okay? It's not like the ones in the center or ones a bit far away, etc. So to ensure a proper sound for everyone, systems in big venues are in mono, okay? Now back to Harry. He asked, if I pan some elements to the left or right, will the signal be stereo or will it stay as a mono signal? By the way, the left alone is a mono signal, and the right alone is a mono signal. Both of them is a stereo signal, okay? So if, back to my first example, which my vocal, if I'm recording my vocal in mono, Ableton is going to show you on one channel, on one where my vocal is. Let's say I'm recording on channel 1. You have 2 meters, one for the left and one for the right, and those 2 meters will be parallel. So what happens here is that Ableton took this signal, which is mono, and it sent it to the left and to the right equally, because Ableton takes in any signal which is either mono or stereo, but it projects it out of Ableton in stereo. That's how the system is configured, okay? Because you have two ears, you have two speakers, you have two outputs from your sound card. I think I answered you, Harry. Unless you have something else, I mean, if you are online, you can send more questions. And I think I got a question, is it possible to produce a song with more than 2 bass lines? I'm going to answer this question before my list of questions that I got on my Facebook profile, because I'm afraid that I will lose you. Who's this? Elizabeth, I think. Elizabeth, yes. So, is it possible to produce a song with more than 2 bass lines? Yes, of course. Why not? But of course, you must belong to one key. Okay. If, for example, let's say you have you started producing a drum pattern, and you want to have a bass line, you'd create a sub bass, for example. Okay. And this sub bass is on frequencies maybe below 100 or 80 hertz or etc. That's just one note. Maybe it's a note C. That's a bass coming from deep frequencies. Okay. And then you need to have another melodic bass line which is on top of that bass. So that sub bass will be the bass line, okay, of another bass line that will be the line of what? Of maybe chord progression or maybe melody or whatever. So why is it called bass line anyway? If you think of a building, let's say you have the foundation of the building, which is the line, the bass line, okay, and then you have everything on top of it. So the bass line is what takes the track somewhere, okay? It's the bass note of the chord, it's the bass note of the melody, etc., etc., etc. So yes, you can have 2 bass lines or more, but of course you cannot have bass lines that are clashing. Again, we go to mixing now. You cannot have bass lines that are clashing from different sounds, and they are clashing together in key, in harmony, and in frequency. It's okay to use different sounds, different presets of your bass lines with S, multiple bass lines, yes, why not? One of them is a sub bass, one of them is a mid tone, one of them is maybe it has more electro-ish high tone, etc. But you must stay in key, you must not have any clash, you must not have any clash also in frequencies, not also in harmony. Okay, I hope I answered you, Elizabeth, and thanks for joining. We have a question from Karim Nami. Can you please answer the following question? If someone is not a musician, how can he produce melodies and harmonies? Is it necessary to study music in the conservatory before joining your school? That's one of the topics that I am going to talk about a lot, maybe in 2 weeks, because next week, by the way, I have Gunther with me. Gunther Sabah, Goons, my very good friend, and the week after I'm going to be solo again to talk about this topic. This is a very important topic. So Karim is asking if it's a must for a person to study music theory in the conservatoire and know all about keys, chords, etc. before starting to produce music digitally using a software. Let me tell you something. First of all, I am not a musician. Okay, I never studied in the conservatory. And if you hear my music, you can notice that my music is very melodic with complex progressions, melodies, counter melodies, bass lines, different progressions in all elements. So I deal a lot with harmonies because that's what triggers your senses, your emotions. That's what gives you goosebumps. If you listen to my album, for example, you will notice that all those melodies that are a bit complex, they come from someone who has never studied music theory. So the answer is no. You must not, it's not a must for you to learn music theory in the conservatory for many reasons. I'll explain some. I had someone in my studio, a friend of mine, who is maybe one of the fastest and most professional keyboard players I've ever witnessed in my whole life. This guy, he came, he played something that he memorized throughout the years. He's a very professional keyboard player. And I was shocked. I was just in complete gaze. I was like, wow, what the fuck just happened? Okay. I asked him, I was like, can you play my song? I made him hear my song on my album, and I was like, can you play it in a different way so I can just, because I like this, I like to see someone play my creation, my melody in a different way, maybe on a different scale or key or whatever. And he was like, no, I cannot play your song because I do not know what notes you played and I do not have the sheet. So when he said this, I was shocked. I was like, wait, you are that professional and you don't know how to play without reading notes? He was like, no, I'm a sessionist. What is a sessionist? A sessionist is someone who reads, is a robot. So he can play Beethoven, he can play etc, etc, etc. He can memorize few things, but if he doesn't have the sheet of music, he can cheat on himself. Okay, so I was very shocked. I was really surprised, and I was like, what did you do in the conservatory for 10 years? So I was like, I was learning how to read notes. I'm a sessionist. Without this sheet of music, I cannot play anything. I cannot improvise. So that's not music, guys. You don't need to learn the science and pollute yourself. In Per-vurt, because I had this 15, maybe 20 years of taboo, it's like I really want to discover the secret of melodies and counter melodies and harmonies. I was like, it's like a dream. It was a dream for me. I was like, I'm sure I can never learn that. If I ever get born again, my only wish is for me to know how to play counter melodies and harmonies and stuff like that. And it was something really hard for me to understand. I was listening to music for 25 years and I'm just thinking of how did he think of this melody, or how did he think of the counter melody, the counter harmonies. Those were my interest, like the chord progressions and all these things. And I tried to learn. I failed, because I had it in me since I was a kid. Maybe I was 4 or 5 years old. My father got me this keyboard and I was just jamming on it. It was a mistake. It was a happy mistake, okay? And I was just trying to figure out things. I was trying to play some songs that I know by ear, you know, and it happened, it has been happening in this way for the past 25 years, until I really wanted to explore the theory behind music. So I was trying to study. I was never able to read those solfège, etc. notes of the conservatory. Never. I tried. I watched tutorials. I got someone to teach me, and I was like, no, I cannot. And then my prayers were answered in this lifetime, not in another one. And suddenly I found myself dissecting music or deconstructing music that I know and studying this whole thing about music by myself. How? By just looking at the sections of tracks, playing them, trying to play each element alone, and just figure out how this artist did this and that and that and that. And I started to figure out some relationship between those notes, how they are related, why do they sound nice together, how did this person come up with a certain progression of chords, etc, etc, etc. And this huge thing that was a taboo for me in 2 or 3 years of hard work, of deconstructing things, of learning things by exploring and figuring out, was just, you know, it gave me a sudden flame, okay? And I was like, wow, I discovered the secret of it, I know it, and that was the biggest blessing maybe I received in my entire life. Yes, that's how important it was for me. Because if you go back in time like thousands of years or whatever, the first person who discovered the theory, he discovered the theory based on no book. He discovered the theory based on his own discoveries, based on his own ways of looking at things, etc. So yes, you too can discover by yourself, because that's how it was discovered from the first place. A human discovered theory, right? So you can discover, you're also a human, so you can discover the theory. But what happened in those years of studies, and I used to like bite my nails and, you know, crash my laptop and punch my keyboard, and, you know, I never slept properly because of this. until I discovered this, and I teach music theory for computer musician, which is only a 5 or 6 hours course. That is a summary of maybe 10 years of conservatory. And I got someone from the conservatory. He was so mad and he was so pissed off because I am teaching this way. You know, it's a very beautiful course. It's something that is really beyond expectation. It's beyond your expectation. This is something I was actually very surprised that I can teach this easy way of figuring out chords, chord progression, keys, scales, harmonies, bass lines, everything. And my students are very happy from that. And back to Karim, I can say you don't have to go to the conservatory to be a sessionist, to be a robot. You must play music intuitively first, check which key you're in, which scale you're in, and try to use science a little bit so that to avoid any clash of notes. Because let me tell you one experience that happened with me. I one time produced a remix for a label and I sent it, and they were like, Mo, what the fuck is this? You sent us a bass line that is completely out of key. We know that you're a good artist, and why are you doing this? Maybe there's a problem. Check your project again. So I went back and I checked the project, and I was like, no, the bass line is super harmonic with everything else. I can hear it. It's in a proper way. I have good ears. And they were like, no, man, go check it in somewhere else. So I came to my studio and I tried the remix on my monitors, good monitors with a good acoustic room. And yes, the bass line was completely out of key. Why? Because in my home studio, which is not built professionally, I wasn't hearing properly because of the acoustic treatment, because of the cancellation of wave, because of reverberation, because of so many things. And I was like, whoa, how come I never noticed that this note in the bass line is so off key? And by the way, it was only one semitone away. So for example, the bass line, the good note must have been the C sharp, and I played a C. So that's just one semitone away, okay? Just 1 second, you guys. So that's just one semitone away. And it made a huge difference when I heard the track on my own system, in my own studio. So the summary of this, sometimes you cannot trust your ears because you don't have a proper setup or a proper sound system or a proper acoustic treatment. So you must have some scientific reference so that you know exactly if that note you're playing is correct or no. Sometimes you really cannot trust your ears, okay? Especially with bass frequencies, because your ear is very sensitive to mid and high frequencies, not sensitive to bass and low frequencies. That's why my advice to you as well, if you're producing a bass line and you want to see, if you want to make sure that your bass line is going properly, it's with no clashes, transpose all the notes you're playing, or play your bass line on a higher octave. Let's say you're playing the bass line on the 5th or on the 4th octave, let's say. It's no longer a bass line, of course, but you just do this because you want to hear mid frequencies or high frequencies. That's when your ear is more sensitive. You play the notes, you take those melodies of the bass line and you push them back 1 or 2 or 3 octaves lower, okay? So that's when you make sure also, if you're of course producing in an environment which is not making you hear properly, that's how you do it. So what else? Yes, so back to Karim, I can say, you know, you don't have to study conservatory, but you have to know one thing which is very important, is that if you study music in the conservatory, again, they teach you how to read notes, etc. And in the electronic music production nowadays, you don't need that at all. You're not a performer. You're not going on stage and performing. You're just composing in the studio. So it's okay to have some charts, to have some formulas, to have some tables, etc. You can have some guides in the studio related to theory and keys, chords, scales, etc. And by then you can just know, you lock yourself in a correct key, and you just produce music in this key. And by the way, again, this is a subject, a very long subject that I'm going to talk about maybe in 2 weeks. and I'm going to give a lot of insights, a lot of tips, a lot of tricks, a lot of names of plugins you can use to help you out with your harmonies, with your progression and stuff like that. And of course, again and again, I can tell you from now, don't use or don't lock yourself in a key before you intuitively create at least the melody. What do I mean? If just put your fingers on the keyboard, close your eyes, and the music, the melody will come through you. Okay, you don't actually produce music. Music comes through you. You just need to be calm, chilled, and just jam. Okay, just jam. Play some notes. Hit more than maybe 2-3 notes after each other. See the relationship between them, and anything that gets your attention at that moment of your state of mind, whatever you are feeling deep inside you, that okay, that's what I want to play, that's the notes, those are the notes that I want to play, you by then move to discover what key or scale you're in, so that you can start working on more complex elements like the progression of the chords, because with the chords you're playing with more than one note at the same time, or you want to do some complex arpeggiations or some counter bass line, etc., etc., etc. So go intuitively first, play what your heart is screaming you to play, find out what key you're in, use science to discover what are the notes that you can play on the keyboard and what are the chords that are available at that key. Do your layering based on that key, and you will not have any mistake. My students, they come out of the maybe second session of the music theory, they can start producing chord progressions, and that's something that I maybe stayed for 10 years or 15 years to be able to do. In 2 sessions they can start layering chords, they can produce progressions of chords in a nice way, you know, and they can just play bass lines in a nice way. And of course we use technology, we use Ableton, we use the piano roll, we use the fold option in Ableton, we use the chord device, we use the scale device, we use other devices which I'm going to talk about later. We also use formulas, very easy to discover. Formula for the major, formula for the minor. That's only the natural minor and the natural major, of course. We have formulas for the chords, we have formulas for progression. It's just something really easy to see in Ableton and to compose music inside Ableton. So what else? I think I don't have any more questions. Those were mainly the questions that I received on my Facebook and on my Instagram. Just give me 1 second, you guys. Maybe I have some questions left. Meanwhile, if you're online with me and if you have any question that you want me to answer, please ask it now before I say goodbye to you, because I stayed for 1 hour. That's the time of the show nowadays. Let me check if I have more questions. Yes, actually I have a question from Ali Shamas. He's asking, what type of equipment should I buy to get started as a home producer and establish a mini good home studio? And why a good mix doesn't always need mastering? Well, Ali, I discussed equipments a lot in details. I think in the title of G.GOES Live was G.GOES Live Studio Setup, Essential Studio Setup. Search for it on my playlist. And by the way, guys, you can watch all the episodes now on my Facebook page or on my YouTube page. Just search for Per-vurt, PER-VURT, and there's a playlist called G.GOES Live. I have all the 8 episodes there. Previously with me I had Stamina, Elias Merab, he's a very known artist in Lebanon, twice. I had Jason Kakouche, I had Mozaza, and I also had Nesta. And next week I have with me Gunther, okay? What is the best synthesizer to create a super saw? That's Ryan. I will answer you, Ryan, just give me a question. Ali, you asked why a good mix doesn't always need mastering. I also talked about this a lot. I'll tell you one thing. If you do a proper mix down, and we discussed mixing today, when you are mixing, you are actually mastering every single channel and every single sound. So when you do a really proper mix down, Now, mastering engineers will kill me for that, but that's my own opinion based on a lot of studies and experience. If you do a proper mix down, you already mastered your track. You just fill in the headroom in the master channel and that's it. That's my humble opinion. Of course, mastering is a magical process, but it doesn't fix mistakes. Mastering engineers, they master your track relatively to your mix. So if you in the mix there is noise that you cannot hear because of bad mixing, you will hear them in the mastering. And by the way, I talked about this earlier before in previous sessions. Mastering wasn't really made for one track. Mastering is when you master an album, 10 tracks, you want them to sound equally, the same warmth, same vibe, etc. That's mastering. That mastering originally mastering is not for one track. When you do a proper mix down, you're actually mastering your track. What else? But my advice to you, Ali, never use any mastering mastering plugins or devices on the master channel, because if you don't know what you're doing, you might be deteriorating the signal flow. And especially that when you are sitting in an environment which is not made for mixing even, like if you're at home with no acoustic treatment, no panels, with a lot of reverberation, you are already not hearing properly. You're not hearing in a flat way anyway. You're not hearing exactly what your software is projecting to you. So your decision for mixing might be wrong. Let's say you hear less bass while there is too much bass in your project. You hear less bass because of a lot of cancellation that's happening in the acoustic domain, and your decision is to increase more bass. And when you go to a club, you hear your track, you hear it with too much bass, and that's the problem. So mixing and mastering, basically, this is not made at home. This is not your job anyway. If you're not, even if you are a mixing artist and you are at home, you cannot mix. You have to be in a proper studio made for mixing, not necessarily isolated or whatever, but you must be in a proper setup for you to be able to do proper decisions. Okay. Those are the questions. I had a question from Ryan. He said, what is the best synthesizer to create a super saw? Well, Ryan, it's any synthesizer actually. Any synthesizer can produce, because what is a synthesizer anyway? Synthesizer, you have synthesizers with one oscillator, two oscillators, three oscillators, four oscillators. You can create an oscillator with unlimited synthesizer with unlimited oscillators. And what I can tell you is that don't look for a brand or for a plugin or whatever. Just know the basics of synthesis, which we talked about a lot, by the way, in G.GOES Live 007 with Elias, with Stamina. That's a course we give also at Per-vurt. We launched a course by Elias. We talked a lot about synthesis. You can watch it again, and I think you will find the answer there. But any synthesizer can produce a super saw. That's my opinion. You just need to know how to oscillate, where to take this sound after the VCO, which is the voltage controlled oscillator, how to take it into, for example, a filter, which is the VCF, how to do some modulation, how to do some envelopes, the ADSR, how to create another oscillation from another oscillator in the same synthesizer, how to merge them together, how to make them modulate together, how to filter them, how to automate them, etc. Those are mainly the things that you need to know while producing a super saw. Marwan Bulbul, one question. Any idea on how to practice to become able to structure a set in your head to be able to have the flow of a mix go smoothly? Marwan, that's an excellent question, but unfortunately I ran out of time. I'll try to answer briefly, and maybe this is something I can talk about in future G.GOES Live solo sessions like the one I'm doing now. Creating a flow is the magic of being a DJ nowadays. It's no longer about beat matching. It's no longer about how you use the filters or the effects or the equalizer. That's not the magic of the DJ. The magic of the DJ, it depends on the style, of course, is when you create a flow, a smooth flow, a mix, because you're taking people in a journey somehow. And when you play extended sets, that's also a very important subject. So I can tell you I can give you some guidelines, but you don't actually prepare it in your head. Okay, that's not how it goes. You actually prepare the music that you want to play, but you do not prepare the sequence of the tracks one after the other. It doesn't happen like this at all. So it depends on the mood, on the vibe. You cannot, for example, let me tell you an example. You cannot go to a palace, let's say, to cook for the king with all his people invited, and you only take with you some ingredients of Chinese food. Maybe they don't like Chinese food, so you will be you won't be successful. Okay, so my advice to you: take the music with you that you want to play. You don't take only those tracks, like 40 tracks. You take more than that. You don't take 5,000 tracks, of course. You just take the music that you find suitable for this specific night. Okay, because you have to study, of course, the theme of the place. You have to study the crowd. You have to study where you're playing. You cannot play music for kids while this music is suitable more for people of older age. So you have to understand those factors before you start playing. And what you do, you don't prepare a sequence, as I said, but you start with a proper management of your playlist. That's where the trick is. If you prepare your database, not for this specific set, you just do preparation of your database. You just organize your files. That's the key word. Let's say you bought 100 tracks from Beatport. The first thing you should do, you don't download bulk music and then you filter them later on. You just listen to the preview online. If you like it, if it's suitable, you just buy it. And then you have another stage of filtering, which is taking those music and put them in separate folders. So for example, warm-up tracks will be in one folder, tracks for the main set will be in one folder, for the closing will be on one folder. And I don't really advise you to name your folder based on style or based on the flow. Like I told you, warm up, but don't do that. You can have different warm-up vibes, different warm-up folders, and don't make a lot of folders. Okay, just have 4 flows, 4 folders: warm-up, main, closing, and opening, of course, opening, warm-up, main, closing. And inside those folders, try not to be so detailed with subfolders, but try to put the tracks that come from the same vibe together. Okay, so for example, don't put all your tracks in one folder and they have different vibes. Always, 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 my answer to you about this question is: prepare or organize your music based on vibe, not based on style, not based on BPM, not based on anything else, just based on vibe. And you can name your folder anything you want. You can name it, for example, I don't know what music you play, but you can name it, for example, a folder based on a club that you know very well. You know the music, for example, BO18. You can name this folder BO18 Friday Night. You're free, you know. The most important thing is to understand what music you have in this specific folder. It's based on vibe. You can name another folder, for example, rooftop, name of a bar, or name of a DJ, or name of a track maybe, that you can relate to when you are filtering your music, when you want to organize your music database, where to put this track and this track and this track. So you must relate to this folder. You must have all your tracks in one folder that are from the same vibe. And then, of course, the biggest, the most important thing is to go harmonically. When you want to play music, that's the last stage you do, of course. When you want to pick up songs when you are playing live, you have to choose this track that is harmonic. You have to do a harmonic flow. And that's when you use mixed in key, for example, or you must choose the tracks based on what key they are in, what harmony, so that you don't have any harmony clash. It's no longer about beat matching. You can press on sync nowadays. It's no longer about playing the #1 hit on Beatport because everyone has it. But it's about beat matching, how you merge tracks together in a flow, and you cannot reach a good flow if your tracks are not played harmonically one after the other. So I think I answered you with a lot of detail. Guys, I need to say goodbye. I stayed with you for 1 hour 15 or 1 hour and a half, and that was a very good question and answer session. As usual, I'm always up for it. Maybe the second time I will be solo will be maybe in 2 or 3 weeks. Next week I have Gunther with me. Stay tuned. We are going to talk about a lot of things. Thank you again, and have a good night.